Sitting there fighting the battle that was over when I had to relocate. You see, I ain't much for letting go. No, baby, I gotta hold on. Cause trials, tribulations, and relationships have all made me strong. Oh, girl, I cry. These tears that I shed on the trail to bring you home. Oh, girl, I cry. Mama told me that a man's own tears can make him strong. Oh, girl, I cry. I'll sit around here and wait for you to come home. I'll cry for you. I'll cry. I'll cry.
Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowances made for fair use for purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statutes that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips in the balance of the favor of fair use. Welcome to today's Black History Bite, Part 3 in Remembering Matilda. Matilda was the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. January 13th marked her 85th years since the death of her, whose name at birth was Abake, meaning born to be loved by all among the Takar people of Western Africa. We left off talking about being sold and split and how Matilda's family, or Abake, of which she was born to be, was separated from her other siblings. Today we pick up with slavery in all but name. However harsh and unjust the circumstances, enslaved people had some small element of security. A slave owner was at least motivated to ensure the good health of his human chattels, to ensure their productivity, which necessitated the provision of food and basic shelter. But after 1865, freed slaves did not find themselves in a friendly world. Many white Americans reacted with indignant fury to the ideal of Black people being their equals. In a harsh and unwelcoming world, there were few options for uneducated ex-slaves other than to remain on the plantations as sharecroppers, a system whereby tenant farmed a portion of land in exchange for a share of the crop. Sharecropping often involved contracts that trapped tenants in debt and poverty, which in practice was not far removed from actual slavery. Upon her emancipation, Matilda and her family thus became supposedly free people. But as Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out in the 1968 sermon, emancipation of the Negro was only a proclamation. It was not a fact. The Negro still lives in chains, the chains of economic slavery, the change of social segregation, the change of political disenfranchisement. During the post-Civil War period of Reconstruction, many New federal laws promoting racial equality were quickly met by local state measures designed to keep Black people in their place and ensure that white people remained ascendant. This is seen in the reaction at the state level to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment of 1865 officially ended slavery in all United states, and territories. Formerly enslaved people were legally freed, while the Freedmen's Bureau was established to aid freed slaves through provision of food, housing, medical and schooling, and legal support. To counter this, southern states, including Matilda's home of Alabama, enacted the so-called Black Codes, curtailing the right of African Americans to own property, conduct business, buy and lease land, or move freely in public spaces. The Black Codes forced many Black people into newly exploitive labor arrangements, such as sharecropping. A central element of the Black Codes was vagrancy laws. Through a system known as convict leasing, many African American boys and men were arrested for minor offenses such as vagrancy, imprisoned, and then leased out to work for private businesses. This created a new system of forced labor, which again was little more than slavery. Convict leasing was legally rooted in the so-called exception clause of the 13th Amendment, which states neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Convict leasing is prevalent in the United States to this very day, with most working prisoners still overwhelmingly Black and Hispanic being paid only a few cents per hour. And even upon their release, ex-convicts have always faced immense hurdles to finding employment, getting credit, doing business, or buying property due to their prison records. The 14th Amendment of 1868 granted full U.S. citizenships to African Americans, with states being legally required to provide equal protection under the law. One response to this was separate but equal, ruling in the landmark 1896 case of Plessy versus Ferguson, which legalized racial segregation in public sphere. A New Orleans man by the name of Homer Plessy, who was 1/8 Black, had refused to sit in a train car designated for Black people. Plessy was arrested and claimed that his 14th Amendment rights were being contraved. The case went to the Supreme Court, which infamously ruled that racial segregation laws did not violate the United States Constitution as long as the facilities for African Americans were equal in quality to those of white people. The Plessy ruling ushered in a raft of so-called Jim Crow laws, which reinforced racial segregation across the American South right up until the 1960s. stemming from a derogatory term for an African American. These laws mandated separate schools and transportation and effectively denied African Americans the right to vote, outlawed interracial marriage, and introduced the use of signage such as whites only to enforce the racist order. And while the 15th Amendment of 1869 prohibited the federal and state governments from denying citizens the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, it was countered by manipulative practices such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and so called grandfather clauses, which restricted voting rights to men who have been able to vote or whose male ancestors could vote prior to 1867. While the Jim Crow statutes were in theory meant to provide separate but equal treatment of white and black peoples, in practice, African Americans received far inferior treatment. And concurrent with these laws were others form of society in racism. For example, barring the wrong type of people from clubs and institutions, city planning measures ensuring that black people remain on the other side of the tracks, and redlining, by banks whereby credit was denied to the inhabitants of black majority neighborhoods. Even places of worship were strictly segregated according to the color of their congregations. Indeed, James Baldwin noted in 1968, almost a century after the 15th Amendment was passed, stated, "We have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. And the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday." All of these laws and policies and social attitudes were enforced frequently with extreme violence by white supremacist groups such as the KKK, often with a direct or tacit support of the police. Such were the harsh conditions in which Matilda grew up. Her childhood ended abruptly at the age of 14 when she was first gave birth, likely as a result of the R word, given the prevalence of white male sexual violence towards black girls and women in the South at that time. Matilda later entered a common law partnership with a German born man called Jacob Schuler and had a total of 14 children, 10 of whom survived into adulthood. What befell the other four is unknown. Whether she was prevented from marrying her partner by the ban on interracial marriage or chose that arrangement is also not known. In any case, Matilda appears not to have benefited financially from the relationship, as she remained a sharecropper, living in the vicinity of Selma, Alabama, for most of her working life. At some point, she changed her surname from Krieg, to McCreer, perhaps to distance herself from her enslaver and as an assertion of her own identity. Over the generations, the family surname has seen a number of further variations, including Creer, Cree, Krieger, and McCreer, waiting all her life for justice that never came. In 1931, Matilda heard a rumor that people like her were receiving compensation for being illegally smuggled as slaves into the United States. That was when she decided to embark on the 15-mile journey on foot to the Selma court in Alabama to make her claim. The judge declared the rumor to be false and dismissed her case. But fortunately for modern historians, an account of her lawsuit was published by the Selma Times Journal. And this was the article discovered by Hannah Durkin, a Newcastle University historian specializing in the transatlantic slave trade and author of the 2024 book Survivors, the last the lost stories of the last captives of the Atlantic slave trade. The Selma Times Journal news story provides a vivid description of Matilda. She walks with a vigorous stride. Her kinky hair is almost white and is plaited in small tufts, and with bright colored string. Her voice is low and husky, but clear. Age shows most in her eyes, yet her skin is firm and smooth. The article went on to relate that Tildy has vigor and spirit in spite of her years, endurance, and a natural aptitude for agricultural inherited from the Takar tribe made her a thrifty farmer. Durkin writes that Matilda's story is particularly remarkable because she resisted what was expected of a black woman in the United States South in the years after emancipation. She did not get married. Instead, she had decades long common law marriage, even though she left West Africa when she was a toddler. She appears throughout her life to have worn her hair in a traditional Yoruba style, a style presumably taught to her by her mother. Matilda fell ill after a stroke and died at the age of 83 on January the 13th, 1940. One participant at Matilda's funeral was her little grandson, John Creer. I was about 3 years old and I got away from my parents and almost fell in the grave, he told National Geographic in 2020. John Creer, a retired hospital administrator and community leader, now in his late 80s, was born in the house of Matilda, recited it. And her funeral is one of the earliest memories. His grandmother's strong character apparently passed into family lore. I was told she was quite rambunctious. He discovered more about Matilda when he and his wife carried out some research of their own into family history. I had no idea she'd been on the Clotilda, he said. It came as a real surprise. Her story gives me mixed emotions because if she hadn't been brought here, I wouldn't be here. But it's hard to read about what she experienced. Matilda waited all her life for some form of justice. and it would be another 14 years before the civil rights movement began to challenge the systemic racism she faced. Iconic leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X pointed out the hypocritical gap between the ideals of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the actual lived reality of African Americans. In the 1964 speech, Malcolm X demanded our right on this earth to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. Although Matilda missed out on witnessing any of this, her grandson was active in the civil rights movement. You can read about slavery and be detached from it, he told National Geographic. But when it comes to your family that is involved, it becomes up close and very real. During the civil rights movement, he was arrested and imprisoned on charges of assault and battery for the offense of stopping a white man who attempted to stuff a live snake down his throat. Indeed, many civil rights campaigners face extreme violence from the police and the National Guard, leaving many injured, imprisoned, or even dead, as in the case of both Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. But their sacrifices were not in vain. And by the mid-1960s, the entire plethora of Jim Crow statues have been taken down. Segregation in public schools were deemed unconstitutional. In the 1954 case of Brown versus the Board of Education, discriminatory electoral practices such as literacy tests and grandfather clauses were banned by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And all other forms of segregation and employment discrimination were outlawed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These were statutory measures aiming to eradicate prejudice in the official sphere. However positive their effect, deeper rooted racism at the societal level remains feature of the United States life. As long as people can be judged by the color of their skin, the problem is not solved. Talk show host Oprah Winfrey said in 2021. 96 years before that, Matilda seemed to recognize this when she seemed unsurprised by the Selma court's denial of her claim for compensation. I don't expect I need anything more than I got, she said after thanking the judge for his time. I want to thank you for stopping by Blended Healing for this quick history bite about the life of Matilda. Please stay woke, and I will be bringing you more content in regards to Black history. Ashe and deep bow to each and every one of you, and I shall see you all very, very soon.
Sitting there fighting a battle that was over when I had to relocate. You see, I ain't much for letting go. No, baby, I gotta hold on. Cause trials, tribulations, and relationships have all made me strong. Oh, girl, I cry. These tears that I shed on the trail to bring you home. Oh, girl, I cry. Mama told me that a man's own tears can make him strong. Oh, girl, I cry. I'll sit around here and wait for you to